proud of you. I'm grateful to you. But this ain't over. There's a storm coming. I'm gonna need your help.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. I can't even. Do you like my look?
For those of you who are not watching on YouTube, where we post these episodes a full season behind the release of the audio podcast, Drea has really been going all out these last few episodes, looking very much like Harley at times, and in this particular case, you're going for a Kristen Milotti, Sophia Falcone / Gigante look. Yeah,
I tried. I couldn't get the bangs together. I realized getting those bangs that short and that spiky, not worth the long-term commitment.
Yeah.
But her look is stunning. She looks great. She looks so elegant, and I'm going to say it, demure. And yet each of her outfits has this edginess to it, right? There's always that bright red scarf, or the heavy eyeliner, or the jewels that are just very outlandish. So it's this combination of glamorous and yet it stands out.
Yeah.
And once you learn about her, you realize she's such an eccentric woman.
Yeah.
I love her very much. And we've given it away that we're actually talking about.
Yeah, we're not talking about Harley today. For our special holiday weekend episode, you opted to do a little 90-degree turn. And instead, we are covering one of the candidates for this season's podcast anyway.
Here's why. I went a little rogue because it is on our short list. HBO's show, The Penguin, has been on our short list since it got announced. And I think we knew it was going to be pretty phenomenal and psychologically very fascinating.
Oddly enough, though, you and I felt that way. But if I remember correctly, I could be wrong. Go back and listen. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. I don't think a single person voted for the Penguin.
I would have to look at the voting stats. It was never really up there.
No, it wasn't really in contention.
And I'll say, let me just give props to the folks that did message me in our Discord and online and even in person. Folks had communicated that they would love to hear us talk about the Penguin.
A lot of people have asked for it, especially since the finale.
Yes. And so here's what we did. It's an upcoming holiday weekend for some of us. If you're in the US, this is likely your case. You'll be traveling, hopefully have a day or two off. While some folks are enjoying turkey, we'll be talking the Penguin. You can enjoy us discussing another bird
that doesn't
fly.
Yeah.
But let me just start out by saying, yes, this is something that has been on our minds and been on the minds of our listeners. We would like to do the special episode. The show just finished up a week ago on HBO. Heavy spoilers in this episode, if you don't mind that.
Yeah, if you've not seen the show, and wanted to before we conduct an analysis, I highly recommend checking out the 8 episodes which are available on Max right now.
And some people have said, well, do you need to watch the Batman film before? Not really.
Nope.
Not really. This sits nicely within the universe, this new emerging universe of the newer Batman, but you don't have to see any film, and even know anything about this character.
This is about as origin-like as it gets for these types of characters. You really could pick up right here, and this would be a suitable enough origin story for a character that I imagine is just going to become bigger and bigger as the Matt Reeves DC shared universe continues.
So what do we need to know before we dive in?
Well, we're getting right into it. Okay. I would say that it is a sequel series to Matt Reeves' The Batman. I was a little shocked by this. I was not someone who was keeping track of production and all of that. I knew that the show was coming. I figured it would have been a prequel series to The Batman so that we could avoid The Batman and so that we could get an origin story for Penguin. What I didn't really take into account was that actually they were going to use a post The Batman story to give us the true origin story for the Penguin. This was a show that originally Matt Reeves had pitched to be part of the sequel film. He thought that the sequel movie would be a good opportunity to spend a lot of time getting to know Oz Cobb, formerly Oswald Cobblepot. And Warner Brothers said, no, we really want to explore this character in great depth. We want to give it an 8-episode series. How do you argue with that? So before it even went to pilot, the show was ordered for a complete season 1 pickup. And so, yeah, it continues to star Colin Farrell in I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and say an Emmy and Golden Globe nominated, if not winning, performance.
Wow.
When you look at Colin Farrell in that makeup, when you listen to him speak as Oz, you are not hearing Colin Farrell. You are not seeing Colin Farrell. This could be some no-name actor that they plucked off the street and were like, you're perfect, and you would absolutely believe it. Do you disagree?
No, I completely agree. As Oz, he is unrecognizable. Like Colin, the actor, is unrecognizable.
Yeah.
This character comes to life. And you know there's makeups on him. You know that this is an elaborate Hollywood level makeup and costume gig. But it is almost like the uncanniness is a different feeling. The uncanniness isn't, oh, that looks like makeup. He's under there. You can see his eyes. You can see his bone structure or whatever. The uncanniness is actually, this guy feels so real, and my brain registers him as not real because I know logically this is a made-up character with makeup.
That's so funny. My brain does the exact opposite.
What does your brain do?
I don't. I spent the first couple of episodes looking for seams in the makeup.
Yeah.
And eventually it got to a point where I was like I said, if you told me that this was some guy named John Smith who came out of nowhere and took the role of the Penguin, I would have believed you.
Well, that's what I mean.
He is so believable to me. My brain doesn't, even when I'm watching the show, does not connect that this is Colin Farrell.
That's what the uncanniness means. That's what I'm trying to convey.
Yeah.
That under a less than perfect job, we would feel Colin through that. Mm-hmm. And that would be uncanny because we're not supposed to, as we're watching this.
Yeah.
The uncanniness is believing it so certainly, and or with such certainty rather, that that it's a little, in the beginning it sort of feels disorienting, a little bit strange, but eventually, and I agree with you, he becomes Oz. You forget that this is a fictional character. He's so believable.
And I think, right. I do. I think that's where you and I differed, is you said in the beginning, it's odd for you, like to because I get the impression that you're searching for Colin in there somewhere,
just like you were searching for the seams.
No, but what I'm saying is, it just never occurred to me that he wasn't a real guy. And I think part of it was because I didn't see any of the telltale signs of makeup. I did not see any of the telltale signs of an accent trying to be hidden. I just didn't. He was just this dude, and it was incredibly impressive. But similar to what you were saying earlier, the other person that I think is going to get nominated, if not win, Emmys and Golden Globes for this series, Kristen Milotti.
Other than this Penguin show, I had not really seen much of her, but she's the perfect person.
I think we should spend this episode, because we are going to cover the series as a whole. There's going to be a lot of spoilers, but what we're not going to do is go through detail by detail every little plot point and every character and every little piece of crime nuance that there is in the series. We're just going to go through really following Oz and following Sophia. We might touch on some additional characters as they relate to those two characters, but the show is really about the two of them coming into their own. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like our show should be dedicated to that. I will start by saying that it is a sequel series. As I mentioned, we do up front see news reports covering the ending of the Batman, which is that the city was flooded by the Riddler's multiple bombs. And we did get the briefest of views of the Batman helping out, just as we had seen at the end of the movie. That is the first and last time the Batman is seen and or even mentioned until the very end of the complete series. The final shot is a crane up from Oz to the city, and we see the bat symbol or the bat signal up in the sky in the far distance. And it makes for a cool shot, but I also don't think it's a coincidence that it's so far away, because it really does set the point that this ain't Batman's story. He's not here. Oz is not the level of villain to warrant this kind of attention. Plus, the majority of the show is spent sort of underground, and part of that is literal, and part of it is symbolic. They're not really out in the...
No. This has some remnants of The Long Halloween.
Yeah.
The comic book / graphic novel, where the story really centers on these two very big seminal mob families who are rivals and who are battling to have control over the underworld of Gotham City.
Those two mob families being?
The Falcones and the Maroni family.
Correct.
And you see how that unfolds actually quite differently, very differently in the Penguin show. But it's a reminder, just like what you're saying, there's this whole culture, of corruption and greed and criminal activity that's happening throughout the city, under the city, following this huge, this is in the aftermath of the city being destroyed.
And very importantly, it's in the aftermath of Carmine Falcone, the head of the Falcone family, being killed. So we're now in a power vacuum in Gotham City for who is going to be the head of crime in Gotham.
Yeah, and so I think if someone is thinking like, oh, how does this happen in a superhero genre? How does this happen on a superhero series? you're not going to see, this isn't like, what's that show? Titans? Mm-hmm. It's not that. It's not, you're not seeing the supernatural, superheroic things, the types of, it's really close
Clayface
up.
isn't running around in the background somewhere. I mean, he might be. We don't know.
Could be.
He very well could
that.
be, but we don't know.
Yeah, but you're not.
There is no Maxi Zeus this time.
No.
There is no. And that's actually why they decided to name him Oz Cobb. In fact, Matt Reeves had talked about the fact that there was a desire to bring these characters down to earth. So in the film, the Riddler's name is not Edward Nygma. He is not Enigma, because that's a little too on the nose. They wanted to play it more realistically. And so Matt went to Jim Lee and said, hey, do you think anybody would have a problem if we just call him Oz instead of Oswald and Cobb instead of Cobblepot? And Jim's like, go for it. And so that's how he became Oswald Oz Cobb. Whether he adds the Ulpot at the end of this name after this series, we'll find out. But I think there's a strong indication that he is now a completely different character by the end of the show.
It doesn't keep the characters from being eccentric and bold and deeply disturbed. I'm going back to their original Long Halloween comic where, again, it's more of a crime drama. Mm-hmm. It's very close and intimate and relational, and you're trying to piece things together, and you're trying to understand, who am I following? Who is good? Who's actually good natured here? And something about the Penguin, which I thought about, was I wonder if the Penguin is taking us into this era of more well-defined, solidly defined villains. Are we past the anti-villain era? You know what I mean? The Killmongers and the Harley Quinns and even the Thanoses, like, oh, well, their purpose actually makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like, there's something to say about their upbringing or their childhood, or like, truly there's something to say about
there's something
Oz.
to be said about that too,
But nothing about this really deepens, for me at least, the humanity around him. I think there's something quite solidly placing him in that more traditional villain category than these other comic book inspired villains that we've been seeing that make us wonder, oh, is that person justified? Do I sympathize with them more? Are they actually the good guy, but in a bad world? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that the Penguin isn't explained well, because we will psychologically explain him and justify why he's doing what he's doing, his motives, his actions, his influences. But I think he's really, for me at least, he's falling within that category of being the straight up bad guy.
That's interesting. I feel the opposite until the end.
Okay.
Well, because there is a transformation that happens, and we'll discuss that. But for me, there is so much about Oz that we as the audience are meant to cling to, that in many respects, he's almost the person that we're supposed to be rooting for in this series, that I can't help but to feel sympathy for him as we deal with his mother, who has dementia. We deal with the fact that he has taken on a bit of a right-hand apprentice in a young man who is from sort of the poorer side of Gotham City, has a stutter. So Oz picks up on the fact that you too are someone with a disability, like me. People don't take you seriously, like me. So I feel like there's so much going, straight up at the top of the show that makes them tell the audience, you're going to love this guy and you're going to be heartbroken in the end when he doesn't reveal himself to be someone that we didn't expect. he instead reveals himself to be a new person altogether. Like, I don't feel like he was putting on a disguise throughout these 8 episodes. I feel like the 8th episode.
You and I have very different.
All right, we got to get into this.
But let me just say why I say that. Because from the launch, he showed himself. And yes, there are times when he forms relationships and shows that he can be in a reciprocal situation and shows that he might do favors for others. But for me, he has always been the same. T to B, soup to nuts. From episode 1 through episode 8. While I agree with you that there's some development there, I was still looking at the same psychological patterns.
Okay.
But that's just the way my brain works.
So let's start from his youth. You can't adequately discuss a character without discussing them from beginning to end in chronological order. I want to start with Oz Cobb as a child. A roly-poly, friendly, lovable, smiling kid with a thick sort of New Jersey accent. He is one of 3 boys to his mother, Frances. His father is not in the picture. Loves his mother deeply, and does not feel seen. Asks her to spend time with him. She does not. When the 2 brothers come in rambunctiously, she takes time away from her busy thing and she spends time with them, which really sort of embitters Oz. He goes off and spends time with his 2 siblings out in the city, and right before a storm hits, they decide, let's go and play flashlight tag in our number 1 spot.
I've never played that. I didn't know what that was, but apparently flashlight tag is where you chase each other with a flashlight.
It's like a combination between like tag and hide and go seek. You hide someplace dark because you got the person who's it has the flashlight, and then that person, if they hit you with the flashlight, you're it, right? Like
they hit you with the flashlight beam.
Well, yes. Yeah, I mean, no one's trying to hit you with a flashlight.
Look, I was an indoor kid reading books, going to the library. I don't know what this is.
Okay, so
but to clarify, this existed. This was a real game.
Yes.
And I think, the era was go play in the streets until it gets dark.
100%.
Like that wasn't, and I say that because
there's a reason why people fear us Gen Xers.
This is why when you look back at Oz's childhood, there's no neglect. They're not impoverished. They're in an okay situation. They're
not impoverished, but they're not well off in any way. They're in a small danky apartment.
Sure, but they have food and shelter and a caregiver. Yes, of course, they could have more resources and be better off, but we don't get enough. We only get a couple of scenes here in understanding his childhood, and what we understand is that he is very attached to his mother, loves her dearly, and doesn't have many other secure relationships.
Right.
He's good with his brothers, but
he's frequently sort of bullied by them, mistreated to some degree. He does have the disability. He's even as a child, he's got the brace on his leg. So he clearly doesn't have a lot of friends, doesn't have a lot of people to hang out with, spends the time with his brothers. During this game of flashlight tag, it begins to rain. They are hiding in the overflow for the city. Where, all the drainage and everything eventually just starts to fill up that area so that the city itself isn't flooding. They purposefully, it seems, go down a shaft via a a ladder that obviously Oz is going to have a significant amount of difficulty climbing down, nearly kills himself, decides, nope, not doing this. I'm going to stay up here. And yes, they do pick on him, but in the same way that brothers tend to pick on each other. They're not particularly malicious.
Right.
But he has clearly had enough. And he decides to close the door, a gigantic, heavy steel door, and plays a little joke on them. He seals it and says, "Good luck getting out. I'm going home."
Yeah.
And they come up the ladder, cannot get out, and eventually they end up drowning because of the flooding of the overflow shafts, and no one knowing that there were two children inside one of them.
Now, here's where things get interesting for this the understanding of him as a child, the psychology of him as a child.
Okay.
While the outcome was horrible, and he ultimately is responsible for the death of his two brothers, at the time that he trapped his brothers in the sewer, he was in the moment of, I'm always the one out of control. I'm going to have you two feel out of control.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to take some power back. And in the moment, I truly believe this was not an intention to kill his brothers.
He absolutely did not intend to kill them.
Now later, he goes home. His mom, once again, quite comforting, asks honestly, where are your brothers? And he lies, and he says they're at the theater. And there's this interesting, almost like anxiously prolonged moment where he keeps looking at the door, and we see the rainy exterior of their warm apartment, and you realize he's gradually coming to terms with the idea that he might have done something terrible. And he doesn't do anything to remedy that. The remorse is limited. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, so it's not as if he's very clear at that point that his brothers are in danger, mortal danger. But it is becoming clearer to him that something bad could happen to his brothers. But he makes no action to fix that problem. He does not tell his mom that they're in trouble. He does not go out himself. He makes no changes in his behavior. He gradually comes to accept that whatever happens. This is really about me and my time with my mom, because he has this anxious attachment style. The anxious attachment style is this lack of security. It's this incredibly vulnerable feeling around your attachments, around your significant others. And with your caregiver especially, the anxious style is, I feel like I need to be clingy. I need to be constantly with this person, or they may abandon me. They may leave me. They may favor someone else over me. So the irrationality of this is, what if something happens to my primary relationship? But yet he's actually done something that may create a chasm, that he might effectively destroy the relationship he has with his mother by doing this to his brothers.
Yes.
So now he has to protect that, and now he has to lie to her. And this is the beginning. There could have been other signs, but this is the very beginning of the need to control others in order to have control himself.
Yes.
And what ultimately is important to him is a secure attachment, or at least some imagined attachment, with somebody who's going to give him attention.
Well said. I disagree about a mild point, but so mild, I'm not even going to bring it up because I think you have said a lot of really good stuff there.
Well, no, share what is the mild. What's the mild?
I never got the sense that he was looking at the door and coming to the realization that they were never going to come through it. I think he was constantly looking back at the door, expecting his brothers to figure out a way to get out.
Yes.
I do not think he ever came to grips until they found 2 boys drowned in the pipes with the fact that he had done something wrong. And at that point, he then decided, rather than fess up, I'm going to step up and be the man my mom needs me to be. I'm going to protect her, and I'm going to give her the world because the 2 other boys can't, and there is no father in this family, and so I'm going to be that guy.
It's compensatory, and I agree with everything you just said. Where I said like the gradual realization, I think that was a little bit of uncertainty of whether these brothers are coming home, and the gradual realization that the longer the clock ticks, the more real it becomes that they're not coming home.
Yeah. Like I don't think he thought that the rainstorm would cause so much water to go down the drains that it drowned his brothers.
I think we're on the same page because it's as if it's ambiguous as far as like, why aren't the brothers coming home?
Yeah.
And he's a child.
Yeah.
We have to remember he's still a kid here, and he's
look out for number 1.
But also he's not exactly sure what happened other than, gosh, my brothers are not coming home.
Yes.
But he knows he did something wrong.
Yeah, he knows, as all children do, I cannot get caught. This is not, I cannot say what happened. Meanwhile, we find out that she actually knows, or she suspects. She believes that Oswald had something to do with the death of her boys. And when given the opportunity to do something about that, which is that there's this mid-level criminal out on the streets in Gotham that Oz and the boys sort of looked up to, this guy Rex. Rex offers to let the boy join their organization. It's like, oh, are you going to lean into this? Are you going to lean into the fact that he is a good liar and that he is, willing to do anything for you and whatever? Or should we just get rid of the kid? And she straight up says, get rid of the kid. Like, kill the son that killed my other 2 boys. She dresses up nice, says, this is after Oz brings her food. He's got it on a little dinner tray, and, Ma, you got to eat. I'm here to take care of you. And she opens the door, and she is in a sequiny dress, not unlike the one that you are currently wearing. And she says, let's go out. We're going to go dancing. They go out for one last night on the town, mother and son. Rex is there. And in this moment, without realizing that he is saving his own life, he manages to talk his mother out of her plan. He says, I'm going to take care of you, Ma. I'm going to give you a penthouse apartment. You're going to look over the city. You're going to wear nice clothes and nice jewelry. I'm going to make sure I get all of that for you. And it wins her over to some degree. She never gets over this internal struggle with the fact that she knows or believes her son killed his brothers. She admits later on that she has always hated him for it, which is the last thing Oz ever wanted to hear come out of the mouth of his mother. And because he is a really good talker. And we find out that is sort of his saving grace throughout his entire life, is he's got a way about him where he can weasel up to people, say the right things, and get out of trouble. Mm-hmm. He ends up from there, basically, as he gets older, he joins the Falcone crime family. Becomes the personal driver to Sophia, Carmine's daughter. And they become close, but that relationship is devastated when she finds out that there's a strong possibility that her father, Carmine, is actually the serial killer known to the media as the Hangman, who is strangling and then hanging these women, most of whom are prostitutes. A very Jack the Ripper sort of a serial killer. She realizes that her mother had been killed in the identical way and decides my father, Carmine, is the Hangman and killed my mother. She takes this very personally. She reveals this to Oz. Oz then weighs, as he does, the pros and cons and decides that it's better for him if he warns Carmine and tells him, hey, this is what Sophia thinks. Carmine then decides to frame Sophia for the murders, and she is then sentenced, or she then has to go to Arkham. She's supposed to be there all of 6 months, except Carmine has the stay extended to a full decade.
Yeah. She's supposed to be evaluated for 6 months.
Yes.
She effectively becomes the Hangman. Unfortunately, all of the crimes and the reputation of the Hangman get pinned on her.
Yeah.
So she is seen, even in a place like Arkham, she's seen as this really ill criminal.
Yeah,
unpredictable,
who like all
murderous.
the other criminals are saying that she's innocent. She's not the Hangman. But if you're a guard in a prison or the Arkham Asylum that we know and love and or hate, you wouldn't believe her either. Clearly, she must be the Hangman, but she's not. She's really not.
Yes, a lot. This is the tragedy of Sophia, because her mother, when her mother passed away, Sophia, as a young child, believed that her mother had suicided, and in fact had discovered her body, her mother's deceased body. And that was painfully horrific for her. That was a trauma that stuck with her for a very long time. And then when she discovered that that was actually a murder at the hand of her own father, it really destroyed her relationships with her family, especially her father, of course. But also it had this almost re-traumatizing effect on her. The event that she had been trying to recover from and trying to understand. And even there were some moments where she was trying to be reparative around this, like searching for the women who might be victimized, seeing her mother as a victim later seeing her mother as a victim of these kinds of things. This all kind of centered around moving from seeing this trauma as one thing and recognizing that her mother was a victim of something else. But I think what was interesting, did that make sense?
Yes.
What I just said? But I think what was interesting is because her mother was identified in the family as someone, quote, crazy and ended their life.
Yeah.
For Sophia to then defend her mother and align with her mother and realize this is more of a victim situation, it actually backfires on her. And it's almost as if people start to see her as someone who has the mental illness.
Yeah. Like,
oh, well, your mom was this way, you're probably this way. And, we'll talk a little bit more about the behavioral problems that she does have. But certainly people painted it out to be worse, especially when she was placed in Arkham.
Yeah. Let's talk about her time in Arkham. She is given regular treatments of electroshock therapy. She is mocked by the other inmates. She ends up, I don't know if befriending is the right word, but her cell neighbor, Magpie, introduces herself and tries to become the clingy best friend character. She wants to know everything. I want to get into the electric shock therapy for starters. I know we've talked about this in the past with other things that we've watched. But what happens to a person who doesn't need electroshock therapy when they are then put under this treatment?
Well, there are a lot of side effects of ECT, and ECT is still used as an effective treatment for serious depression and serious suicidality. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's contraindicated for someone like her, because unfortunately, the exposition doesn't necessarily tell us why they're doing this to her. I think that we're getting the sense that I hate to say it, I feel like the folks at Arkham are trying to give her a hard time. They're trying to give her a very negative experience at the facility. Is it her father's doing? Is her father essentially in with the powers that be?
He has to be to some degree,
Sure.
right? To go from a 6-month observation to a 10-year long sentence.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that isn't even legally okay. That of course, that should be contested. No one should be incarcerated for 10 years without due process.
Yeah.
But, you know, he effectively not only places her in long-term incarceration, but also he manages to manipulate the system so that she receives such serious interventions, ones that are invasive, ones that are potentially contraindicated, meaning, to your point, does she really need this?
Right.
Was she properly assessed? Did she receive clinical evaluations? Is she offered other types of treatment?
And we know that all of them are given this red drug that's meant to basically give them such a euphoric high that it sedates them into submission.
Yeah. It's almost like a combination between a mood stabilizer and a benzo. Like it makes you feel good, it makes you feel calm, but it also makes you susceptible. It makes you more willing to go along with things that are happening in Arkham. None of this is ethical. Like, there are so many points here from the treatment to not getting consent from anyone to, you know, who's the conservator? Is that the father? If that's the case, then he can make some pretty big decisions about her treatment. She's there involuntarily. She has some rights, but essentially, first line treatments will be administered to her. ECT, unclear if this is the right treatment. She should have tried other treatments before getting to this place, meaning psychotherapy, psychiatric medications, enough time to see if these other treatments are working. And if the treatments are found to be ineffective, then ECT is what you might consider an effective last resort because of its side effects. Side effects typically range from discomfort, obviously, to short-term memory loss, to forgetting long stretches, like long episodes of memory loss. But ultimately, these kinds of treatments can show to be effective in traditional inpatient psychiatry,
right.
Of course, along with other things.
So what are the benefits of ECT?
The benefits are that it has been shown to bring depression symptoms down.
And how is that done? Like, what is it meant to do to the body?
That remains
okay.
Somewhat unclear. It's not pseudoscience. It's not as if there's no explanation.
Right.
But it's essentially kind of like kickstarting the circuitry of the brain, and folks believe that it replenishes certain neurochemicals within that the processing of the circuitry, and you kind of like your brain almost receives this remedy to process its neurotransmitters in a way that helps rebalance them in the same way that medication works.
Yeah.
So, but this is still one of those treatments that, and we're going to talk about another treatment like this. We know it's effective. But we also know that there are other treatments that are less invasive, that are more ethical for the patient, and that may be just as effective, right? So there are ways in which this should be explored. The hospital that I consult with has ECT, so it is still a modern, still a used, and still an effective treatment for serious mental illness that includes depression. Because of its invasiveness, right, there are ways in which the patient can become more comfortable. Sometimes certain sedatives are given, certain stabilizers are given so that the patient feels more comfortable throughout the procedure. And by the way, you don't just do this once. You have several sessions of this procedure for long-term benefits. And for folks who have done this, some of them swear that this has been the best thing they've done. And others say, is it better for me to not be depressed and have lost so much of my personality and my memory and kind of feeling like a zombie? Or, can I live with the level of depression that I have and not have these episodic losses and these periods of feeling like I'm not myself?
Anybody who's looking for a real life example of someone who had it and says that it's the best thing that ever happened to them. I know we've discussed this before. The longtime talk show host, Dick Cavett, famously wrote in his autobiography that he had ECT. It required 2 sessions. After the second session, he was a completely new man. And now swears by it, says that this is what changed my life for the better. And but it's one example. While in Arkham, I don't know if befriend is a right term, similar to Magpie. One of the doctors, Dr. Julian Rush, begins to sympathize with her, begins to see the mistreatment. And basically, upon realizing that she is innocent, decides to leave the hospital. He is no longer an employee of Arkham. And she sees this as, once again, the people who care about me abandoned me. Contrary to that, when she's released, he comes back to her and says, let me help you. Let me be your right-hand man. Let me be your advisor, your confidant. He's basically in love with her.
There is so much wrong with this dynamic.
Well, let's talk about that. Ethically, we have said that as your doctor or as someone's doctor, you are not supposed to have a romantic relationship with them. But there's a time limit on that, right? There's a period of time in which they shouldn't or couldn't ethically. You could have serious repercussions.
Right. Technically, a therapist, a counselor should wait 2 years. Ethically, it's 2 years. Now, there may be some, there still are some problems with that, right? Because 2 years can pass since you've last seen a client. That doesn't mean that there isn't that power dynamic still there. They may still be seeking treatment. They may still be working on their therapy goals. It's very, very discouraged to have a romantic or intimate relationship with a client, even if the client has completed therapy.
Right.
And with this therapist, Dr. Rush, there's so many unethical things that happen at Arkham, and after he leaves Arkham and Sophia leaves Arkham, they continue to have this very dangerous relationship where she's manipulating him. He is also my understanding was that he continued to treat her after she got out of Arkham, and she would go to his house, and at his house, he would implement the therapy, and he would hug her and try to be physically close to her. It was very, very uncomfortable.
And by the way, that character, there's a strong indicator that he was intentionally or originally supposed to be Jonathan Crane.
Oh, cool.
When you see him in his office, there are 2 pieces of set decoration. One is what appears to be a mask on his desk. and the other is like a glove.
Okay.
That is sitting there potentially with like
a little like needle glove,
possibly.
Great.
And it's just sort of sitting there on display as if this is like a cultural artifact of some kind. But it was determined later that he would not be Crane, that we're going to create a new character for this, not Jonathan Crane. But maybe this is where Jonathan Crane gets his mask and needle gloves. Maybe he kills Julian Rush. Maybe Julian Rush does end up becoming Crane. We don't know. There's a whole other movie coming. But yeah, so she is released. Oz has her brother Alberto killed. Alberto was the only one who stood up for his sister, was the only one who never let her down. She was extremely close to her brother. Her brother was an idiot, was one of those guys that should never be allowed to take control of a family operation, business of any kind, certainly not a criminal organization. A bit of a loudmouth, bit of a show off. He's not the right guy for that.
No, he would have driven it into the ground.
Correct. And in an impulsive rage, as he is mocking Oz just straight up shoots him. It's like, okay, I'm done. I can't listen to this guy anymore.
Yeah.
Seconds go by before Oz realizes what he's done. And he then stages it to look like a message from the Maroni family to the Falcons. He convinces Sophia to join his side of the battle with the Maronis, but then also convinces the Maronis that he is working with them against the Falcons. So he is definitely playing both sides. However,
can I just name that scene where Oz decides to hold up his gun and just kill the brother?
Yeah.
How jarring that is. Certainly he did not plan to kill him in that moment.
Right.
But the readiness for it was interesting. This isn't someone, and we've talked about different types of violence. Most of Oz's violence is planned.
yeah.
But we'll find him doing these kinds of things that look impulsive. And I would argue that in the moment, while it was not planned, it doesn't have that heated energy that more of the like defensive, impulsive violence we've talked about before has, where there's this this incredible stressor and the system is out of control. There's almost a calmness to it. Like, I'm just going to decide to do this because this person is bothering me.
Yeah.
And I'm irritated. I'm activated by the fact that they think they're better than me. And the worst thing you can do is come across as if you think you're better than the penguin.
Yes.
So he offs him.
Yeah.
Where you see the stress, it's later.
Yeah.
It's like, oh gosh,
It's not even a guilt.
No.
It's a, oh God, I just killed the heir to the crime family.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. So I'm sort of characterizing Penguin's violence as more functional violence. And again, there are times when he's a little bit stressed and aroused when he's engaging in violence because he has to be. But most of this is a calmer, premeditated, or very kind of decisive type of violence that does concern me as far as his pathology. This isn't good.
Yeah.
He's willing to take someone's life simply because that person offended him or is in the way.
And he ends up raising eyebrows, particularly Sophia's, when he comes to her and says, hey, your brother and I had a plan. We were going to take this new drug, this new designer drug called Bliss, and we were going to take the Gotham City by storm. And she's like, that's interesting. Why would he have told you about our plan? And not realizing that she had been in on it. So, now Oz appears to be taking the idea for himself, etc. Meanwhile, Bliss is literally the medications that they were being given forcibly in Arkham. So she knows it works, and she knows that that Gotham and beyond could become, this could be
It's an
the
addictive
new
drug.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the business.
In a deal gone bad at night, the Maronis catch up to him and realize, and then there's the realization that he has been playing both sides as both families are sitting there. There's the wife of Maroni, and then there's also Sophia, all there at the same place at the same time. Makes it very clear that Oz is in over his head. Vic, who we've not talked about really much at all, but is the proxy for the audience to the series, comes in, saves the day. A gunfight begins. Penguin gets into the car, and when Vic says, "What about Sophia?" once again, Penguin betrays her by saying, forget her, just go. And they drive off.
People are expendable.
Yes.
No relationship. I would even contest that even his relationship with his mother is sacred.
Okay, we're definitely going to talk about that.
Everyone is expendable in the Penguin's eyes if it means his survival.
Yeah. Julian Rush comes in, saves her from the situation, and that's when she decides we're going to go in a completely new direction. She goes back to her home where ever since she's been released, the other members of the crime family, they don't like her. They don't trust her. They think of her as crazy, the person who spent a decade in Arkham Asylum. They don't know that she wasn't the hangman. Right. They don't know that her father set all this up. And those who do know aren't saying anything about it. She decides to murder all of them in their sleep by putting carbon monoxide throughout the gigantic estate. Everyone dies except for the right-hand man.
Well, and her little niece.
Well, and the niece, but he was in the house.
Yes.
And she made sure that he was not killed. Everyone else in the house is dead in minutes. She brings her cousin's daughter with her to a little greenhouse atrium, and they decide to sleep there for the night, keeping both of them safe and protected from the carbon monoxide poisoning. She then announces that she is the new head of the family. Only it's not going to be the Falcones any longer. She is going to take the name of her mother, and they are now the Gigante crime family. Vidi, the right hand, the right hand man, the capo.
Yeah.
Does not like this idea. She shoots him on the spot. She uses him as a sort of a symbolic gesture. This is how it's going to go now, and she ends up winning over the other members of the family.
And again, while it looks like an impulsive action, much of this for me is still in the realm of instrumental violence. Mm-hmm. It serves a purpose. You just said it. It's to serve as an example so other people knows that she means business.
Yeah. Trust
her, be loyal to her, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
But don't question Sophia. So it's very it's a frightening type of person. This personality is very frightening to be around because it actually looks unpredictable. It looks very impulsive, if you will, but it actually it's this fine line. Later, when she's approaching the Penguins, like the closest thing he has to a girlfriend, she comes across in the same way. Like, you think she's going to kill her, but she finds reason not to.
Yeah.
So there's her own rationality behind this.
Well,
It
and
makes sense to her.
And what's interesting is the rationality, like you just said, no one in that room should have been afraid of her, because she specifically was going to kill the one person that she knew was going to have a problem with this. And then she tells everyone else, you have always worked for scraps. I'm going to start divvying out the money. Like, it's basically, it's going to be profit sharing from this point forward. You're all going to get an equal cut, and you're all going to be an important part of the success of this family. And that's what wins the others over. She might be crazy, but she's also making sense, and we're getting paid. So that's how she manages to keep control of the family. She also makes a deal with Maroni from prison. She helps him escape. They end up partnering together because they have a common enemy in Oz. Oz is now building his empire very quickly by creating bliss himself, and has begun flooding the streets of Gotham with it, effectively pushing them out of the industry. Maroni ends up tracking him down. They get into fisticuffs. Maroni dies of a heart attack, but out of sight of anyone else. And so Penguin ends up shooting him a couple of times and saying, look, and here's the beauty of what Penguin's doing. Penguin is also uniting the various other crime factions within Gotham, but he's doing it similar to the way that Sophia is. He is saying, you're all part of this. Like, this is yours it's not me taking all the profits. This is us all working together. And he has done the impossible by uniting warring gangs to build his empire. So what I always liked about this show was just how much the two of them were going down parallel paths.
Well, and they have very similar personalities, just in terms of feeling a sense of disempowerment and this thwarted control, and finding ways, I suppose, to claim territory, to claim power, to
and she doesn't even really
succeed.
care about it. Like, she's not someone who really wants to be a crime lord so much as she is simply taking the power that she feels that she deserves, that she is owed, as being a member of this family. And basically just getting revenge on anyone who had anything to do with the worst 10 years of her life.
Yes. And in a way, what I actually like about Sophia is that some of this power is unearned, right? Like, when she sets the manor on fire, she collects all of the important stuff that she feels is a part of her right to have. The jewels and her mother's fur coats, and kind of the abundance of riches that she needs to portray by being this new character, this Sophia Gigante.
But also specifically making sure these are all things that belong to her mother. So she's taking the Gigante stuff.
Yes, it's kind of reclaiming and adopting this new identity, and yet there's a bit of cosplay around this, or there's a bit of pantomiming that I see here with her mindset of, if I just burn it to the ground, get rid of the traumas, put them behind me, kill the people that have wronged me, to be in Arkham and be so disempowered and tortured that way, and to come out of it with this new identity, it's such a flip-flop. It's like, this is her. This is like, a phoenix emerging with this new identity. But it becomes almost a caricature at some point. You see in the way that she speaks and the way that she dresses, it's almost as if she's playing it up a bit. I don't know if she's trying to convince herself that this is going to earn the respect of Gotham City or of the people around her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's how it feels for her to be in the spotlight in this way. But the scene at the dinner table when her family's still alive almost tells me that there's a rebellious nature to this that she's still experimenting with.
Yeah.
Like, let me just speak with my words. Let me just see, give it to y'all in the way that I see the world. And it's bold and it's out there and it's the way in which she sees her new identity. But I think a lot of it is this flamboyance that I'm wondering, where is that coming from? Is it attention seeking? Is it authentic? Is it trying to emulate her mother? Is this what her mother was like? It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I like it. And I'm not saying that it's inauthentic to the degree that it's not long lasting. I just wonder, it's almost like a child figuring out who she is as an adult and kind of like actualizing some of these personality characteristics and traits that she wasn't afforded the space to do it.
Speaking of mothers, Sophia manages to track down Frances, Oz's mother, who she thought had died a few years back. In fact, she even says that I tried to console you. Like, I believed you when you said that your mother had died. Meanwhile, he had her in hiding. And with the help of Dr. Rush, she uncovers a significant amount of information, which is that backstory about Oz having killed his brothers and the revelation that Frances never forgave him for it and has hated him all along. Believing that he is trying to get his mother back, ultimately he is lured back to the where is it? It's his apartment, her apartment. I can't remember where they end up, but he does go there.
Is it the nightclub? Is that what you're talking about?
Maybe where yeah, that must be where
like
it is.
It's the nightclub. You mean where he and his
where
mother
he killed Alberto and oh no, you're right. It is the nightclub where they spent what was supposed to be their last night together.
Yes.
It's a defunct club at this point. And she reveals that she knew all along. He refuses to admit it, down to the point that they're going to cut his mother's finger off, finger for a finger, because Oz did the same thing to her brother. And he will not say that he did it. And finally, she's like, just say it. I know you did it. Frances, says, I know you did it. I've always hated you for it. And she eventually stabs Oz in the gut. His mother stabs her son in the gut.
Her true reaction to him.
Yeah. For the first time in all these many years, she is actually doing what she's wanted to do all along. Let's talk about how the story is revealed. Because again, as I mentioned, she has dementia. She sometimes forgets who she's talking to. Sometimes she forgets when she is, where she is. She begins to relive things. And while talking to Sophia and seeing, or talking to Sophia and being sort of triggered with this idea of the brothers, she then begins to remember the rain. She begins to remember where she was when she was standing by the window, waiting for the brothers to come home, and then realizing that they were never going to. And she remembers all of this stuff. Sophia brings in Dr. Rush, who uses a device, EMDR, I believe is, or EDMR.
Okay.
Drea, need to
Stop.
take us
You need to
through.
stop.
You need to take us through
need to stop.
the EMDR therapy device, which basically looks like the front of Kit from Knight Rider. It's just this really slick.
And I think for the video portion, let's just show a still image of how large this light system is that Dr. Rush uses, and I'll comment on this.
Okay.
This is, you're right, it's a device that has 3 layers of lights, and the lights move back and forth.
And it's a piercing red light that just moves back and forth.
I have a number of things to say. One is that I don't recall anyone ever naming the procedure, naming the therapy on the show.
Okay.
My recollection is that when we see Dr. Rush treating Sophia, he has this light device in the room while she's retelling and remembering traumatic memories. Later, we see the same device at the climax of the series, where he uses the same procedure to essentially uncover memories from Oz's mother.
Right.
So from what I remember, they don't tell you what technique this is. But in the way that I see this is, one, I'm actually really glad they did this. There's something interesting.
By not giving it a name?
Well, absolutely. I'm so glad they didn't name this, because EMDR does not look like this. This is it's an elaboration. It's an inflated. It's a horrorization. This whole show is what I would consider a horrorization of mental health and mental health treatments. What happens to Sophia at Arkham, what's happening between this psychologist and her client, Sophia, and the way he's implementing this device. This is a way to make therapy into this very non-consensual, nightmarish experience. And so I think it fits well within what the show is trying to do. Dr. Rush is meant to be he's an accomplice in what Sophia is doing, and it's not good. It's manipulative, it's coercive, it's abusive in some ways. How he treated Sophia and the way he used the intimacy together, and how she used him as well. All of it is very abusive. So I think that it fits. I don't have a big problem with it, because they didn't name this device. They didn't name this therapy.
But the device exists.
It does exist. And I'm actually going to send you a image of what this actually looks like. So let's talk about EMDR a little bit, and then I'll talk about this device. What I'll first see, can you see the image I'm showing you of this? It's essentially what we call a light bar.
Okay.
You see the size of this bar. It's about 3 feet long. It's one light that basically moves back and forth.
It's not a red
it's not
light.
Usually
it is
red.
A white light.
It's usually like a green or a blue or a white. It's not meant to be jarring or menacing. And the 3 lights that are on this giant display that Dr. Rush is using is very much an exaggeration of a real device. So the light bar is one way in which EMDR is administered. We've never talked about EMDR on the show, so let me talk about this a little bit. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. Let me first say a couple of things in support of EMDR, because this is still considered a controversial and questionable therapy, and I'll say more about that. But I first want to start with the positive. EMDR is an evidence-based therapy for PTSD. It has been approved and listed in the National Registry for evidence-based therapies. It's a practice that is widely used to help somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder, and has been shown through research studies that this kind of therapy can reduce PTSD symptoms.
Okay.
So it does have efficacy. Both the American Psychological Association and the WHO, the World Health Organization, have identified this therapy as being effective. And it is not only widely used in hospitals and clinics, it's also used in private practice. What I showed you, this light bar, is something you can purchase to do EMDR in your private practice with your clients. And so this is something that, many therapists do. I have therapist colleagues that do this. I have many friends and clients who have said they've received EMDR and it's been effective. So I just want to name that at the very top, that this is a therapy that has been scientifically proven to work. Now, how does EMDR work? This is where there are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. So the therapy, or the meat of the therapy in EMDR, involves moving your eyes back and forth as you process a traumatic memory. You do not actually need a light bar to do this eye movement. In fact, the very first person who discovered EMDR was doing it like this, and I'm moving my fingers back and forth, kind of like in a rapid motion like that. And the idea is that as you watch my fingers or a light or something move back and forth, that you are reprocessing your traumatic memory, and that allows you to make that memory less vivid, less experiential, and the distress that you relate to it comes down over time.
So it's sort of a distraction from
here's
that.
Here's the question about EMDR. It is unclear how this mechanism actually works. Why does this work? So the good news is that it works. And you don't need what Dr. Rush had, like this giant light display. He could have just used his hand. The light bar is unnecessary.
But Drea, if you're going to buy it, you need to get some use out of it. You're going to have to write that off come April for your taxes. So
you're bringing up such an interesting point, and this is why I have some questions. I have many questions about EMDR. It is very expensive to become an EMDR therapist and to purchase, to have the light bar and some of these other devices you can get.
This also looks like a very easy device to just make yourself.
I'm thinking about, you could probably.
This is just a white light going back and forth
exactly
on a single bar. Like I'll go get you some LEDs. We'll make this right now.
Well, so what is unclear about this therapy is that mechanism. And
But let me just point out, because you said it's going back and forth,
yes.
and one might suggest, based on the way that they are presenting this therapy in the nature of this show, you'd almost think he was putting her into hypnosis.
I love that you said this.
Using, the classic look at the watch.
I love that you said this. The person who discovered EMDR
also discovered hypnosis.
No.
Oh.
The person who discovered EMDR, her name is Francine Shapiro. She is under some scrutiny for a couple of reasons. One is that her discovery of EMDR was a part of an origin story that isn't really found in science. Like, she was walking along a lake and said she was thinking of something really disturbing, and then noticed that her eyes were moving back and forth, and then realized, I've got to study this. This is effective. My feelings of distress went down when thinking about this really disturbing memory. I think it has something to do with eye movement. And she then studied this eye movement therapy, put a bunch of patients into these trials, and then it really just exploded from there. This therapy is younger than you and I. This therapy is like in its 30s. It hasn't been studied for very long at all compared to other treatments for PTSD and related conditions. It was very unscientific to begin with, and now, while it's proven to work, what remains unclear is the functional mechanism of this treatment. So you mentioned distraction. So there's a couple of things that might be behind this effectiveness. You said distraction. There's a low-key distraction if you're thinking about a memory and you have to keep your brain on task. That might be a way in which someone is over a course of sessions gradually getting more used to this difficult, disturbing memory. They're learning how to kind of distract their mind from it. That could be it, and that's fine. Another explanation of why eye movement might work is this concept that it's essentially helping you reprocess the memory because you're moving from your amygdala processing something. The amygdala is a place in the brain that's like a hot plate for emotions and feelings. And if you're moving from processing there to maybe a more higher level processing, that may be why this is working. Mm-hmm. And you might be activating a part of your brain. That's called bilateral stimulation. So you might be activating a part of your brain that is allowing you to kind of reprocess and recategorize the traumatic memory. So it's essentially kind of placing your memory in the network that it's supposed to belong in, which is not dangerous to you. It's in your history, but it's not meant to be something that deserves a level of distress that your body is assigning to it. So it's kind of, that's one explanation. And there are other explanations, but what's really interesting is the developer said, well, it's kind of like REM sleep. When you're in REM sleep, your eyes move back and forth. And that's maybe one of the, mechanisms that's at play here. And when you're sleeping, there's a lot of reparative cortisol-based work happening. So maybe it's that. So these maybes collectively really have not been grounded in actual science. They've not proven to be true. The other thing about this bilateral stimulation is that you don't need to use your eyes for it. Some therapists have done tapping. You see me put my hands here like a butterfly, and tapping is this bilateral movement. I don't know if this mic is picking up on this. I have sequence today, which is going to give it that extra tap. But tapping has become very popular, and it's based in the same idea, this theory that bilateral stimulation is meant to help you reprocess a traumatic memory. So fundamentally, I would say, so if the tapping is what is the underlying mechanism here, why is the therapist spending $800 to buy a light, this light system? And why is the client spending hundreds of dollars to use the light system with you? Right. So I have concerns clearly about how this treatment remains unscientific in terms of the actual mechanisms that are responsible for the improvements in symptoms, and also the way in which it has been folded into the consumerism of treatments for very, very common problems like PTSD. There are existing psychotherapies for PTSD that do not cost this much. So what is the point of building this extra element into your therapy? I don't necessarily call it pixie dust or a magic wand or a placebo effect, because I think there's much more to it than that. But I have yet to read the science that shows me and demonstrates to me that there is something fundamentally, scientifically more advanced than what's happening in more traditional trauma-focused therapy like exposure therapy and cognitive processing therapy. So there's my spiel on EMDR.
So what I'm getting from that is that I need to take the one I got for you for Christmas back to Best Buy, where I mean,
it looks cool.
But you could also, similar to the way that you said you could do it with your finger.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, I'm not look, I don't want to give away any secrets. Let's just say that if you're in a particular industry, magic, for instance, there are items that you could put on your finger that will make a little white light, and you could just do that. And, it would not be expensive at all.
like put a white light on your actual finger to help the tracking?
There might be little
That's cool.
devices that you could just slide onto your fingertip to.
And it's like $12 or something, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
We could go to Disneyland and probably pick one up at the
magic shop. Well, so therapists do not want any association with magic, right? That's not scientific. It's a pseudoscience. You mentioned hypnotherapy. This developer, the developer of EMDR, has a staunch position that this is not hypnotherapy and does not work the same way. I think, let's come back to the penguin. There's something hypnotic about the conversation, and she's kind of going into this state of...
Francis or Sophia?
Sophia. There's one episode where Sophia is undergoing this treatment and she's recalling the event so vividly that it's almost like she's back there. There was something somewhat hypnotic about that, like she was going into a different state of cognition. I honestly don't know if there are some elements of hypnotherapy. Like, you're more of an expert around hypnosis and the folks that do hypnosis, to the extent that like the person undergoing hypnosis has to have some susceptibility. There has to be some willingness. There's like a type of person more able to be hypnotized. And I wonder if that's what's happening with the folks who find EMDR to be useful. Yeah, because there's plenty of people who's done it and who say, this didn't help me. And there's equally the same number of people who have done it and said that it did help them. But let me just be clear. This therapy is no more effective than existing therapies for PTSD. And this therapy, as I mentioned, was proven to be effective in that it was better than no therapy at all, and better than the talk therapy style of a similar length intervention. So someone just talking to a client, but not implementing any kind of structured intervention like this.
What I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that really it's about buy-in. It's about faith to some degree. It's about... whether it's talk therapy or EMDR or hypnotherapy or whatever, if you, the client, the patient, buy into it, you're going to be more susceptible to getting positive results.
That is a huge part of this, and it's not necessarily something that you can control for in these clinical trials. And let me read how the EMDR therapists describe how this works. Bilateral stimulation functions like a soothing lullaby that quiets the overactive amygdala. By creating new neural pathways, bilateral stimulation can effectively turn down the volume of the amygdala's anxiety-inducing hyperactivity. In essence, it helps to retune the amygdala, promoting a more harmonious emotional landscape. The reason why EMDR is so effective is that it inhibits the amygdala, which is part of the brain responsible for fear or the fight or flight response. So bilateral tapping or shifting eyes back and forth helps to suppress this response, decreasing the physiological arousal often associated with traumatic and painful memories. If you're a therapist and you describe it that way, that sounds super scientific to a client.
Interesting. I thought the opposite.
Well, so you.
I was like, wow, that sounds hippy-dippy.
For I know, but for many clients, that's very reassuring.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It's saying, this method that requires not so much of you. It's not invasive. It's a moving light. All you have to do is follow it. And I'm going to ask you a few questions. By this point, I've already assessed. We've already built rapport, and in a way that's not super different than other therapies, we start talking about the difficult memories that are creating distress for you. In that way, if a client, like you said, has that buy-in and has that sense that yeah, this is really going to work because I'm relying on this procedure. I'm relying on my brain to do a lot of this work. I think for some people that can be really compelling. And then for others like you, that didn't sound scientific to you.
To me, it sounded new agey.
Totally.
And like, we were like, it's a peaceful, it's like a this. I'm like, all right, where are the rocks? Give me the rocks.
What are you going to do with the rock?
I don't know, touch them, rub them, lick the salt off of whatever you do with rocks and other sort of new agey devices. That's what it sounded like to me.
Sure.
As you read it. But part of that also might be your NPR voice.
It could be.
As you're reading that off.
And I want to be respectful toward our audience members who have done EMDR and who have felt or who have experienced significant improvement in their trauma.
We also have a number of other clinicians who listen to the show.
We have listeners who are probably going to explain EMDR better than I just did.
Yeah. After all of this and after she stabs Oz, Francis actually ends up going into a coma. And Oz manages to escape his certain doom. Takes her to the hospital and then goes about, I guess at that point, there's sort of a bounty put up for Oz, first one of you crime family leaders that finds Oz, you get all of it. You get the entire industry of crime in Gotham City, once held by the Falcones, then the Gigantes. It's all yours. Well, what she didn't anticipate was that it's not the heads of those crime families and gangs that she should have been negotiating with. It was their right-hand people. It was the folks that really do the dirty work, because they call up Vic and they convince him, hey, just tell us where you are and where Oz is. We're coming to you. And they put Oz in the car, and you think that they are driving him, that they have betrayed their former boss, and that they are bringing him to Sophia for all the power in Gotham. And then it turns out that they have all turned on their own crime bosses because they believe that Oz is better suited for their own needs. And in this moment, Sophia realizes she has lost, and she is taken out to the edge of the river, and you believe that Oz is about to kill her sort of gang assassination style, back of the head. Yeah. And instead, suddenly a helicopter shows up and a bunch of flashing lights, and you realize that what Oz did was actually set her up to be arrested and put in prison again. And Vic, in this quiet moment of celebration, admits that to him, Oz is family now. Now, this is the opportunity that we can really take to talk about Vic. Vic is the proxy for the audience. He is the person from whom we are, or through whom we are going to learn about the crime families and how everything works. And I believe that it was smart to bring in someone as doe-eyed as this particular actor, as innocent as this guy portrays, because you instantly fall in love with him. Oz instantly falls in love with him. Oz terrifies Vic to some degree, until by the end, we understand that Vic lost his entire family in the flooding of during the movie The Batman, and he admits that Oz is his new family. Well, and this is why I say that it seems like a turning point to me. Oz has now been stabbed by his own mother. Oz has seen what the Falcone family did to Sophia. Oz has seen what the Maroney family does to themselves. As far as Oz is concerned, family makes you weak. And in that moment, the only thing he can do is kill Vic, because he cannot allow himself to be emotionally compromised any longer. He has just spent however long, 30 years, 40 years, being emotionally dedicated to his mother, only for her to turn around and stab him in the gut. He can't allow that to happen again. He severs the connection that he has to anyone he would consider family. And that Vic saying that you're family to me
could have been that could have
that's
been the driver
right there
of the next step for Penguin. I think you're right. You know, I think there has been some reflective work that Oz has done around who to keep close to him and who to trust. And I think you've captured it really beautifully in a way around how any closeness and intimacy on Vic's part was actually threatening to Oz.
Yeah.
The dynamic between Oz and his mother is really interesting. What happened to his mother is that she ended up having a stroke and survives, but is essentially catatonic, right?
She's catatonic.
He continues, the very last moments that we see between the two of them is that he set up this penthouse apartment for her.
She's giving her everything he promised.
That bed. She's essentially in like a hospital style bed overlooking the city, but she cannot enjoy this life because she's had such significant medical events. Not just the stroke, but this woman, they named some things that she had struggled with. Lewy bodies, Parkinson's, alcoholism, unclear, but certainly some type of dementia, and then the stroke. This woman is not coming back to a functioning lifestyle.
But correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be. Maybe this is me romantically remembering it differently. When she overlooks the city and there's this moment of sort of she's now imprisoned here in this room, in this bed, looking out over the city. He comes up and talks to her, and it's not threatening, but it is as well when you realize
on his part.
Yeah, well, it is because he comes up and he's like, "Look, Ma, don't you see what I did? Look at all that. This is all for you. I finally did it. Whatever." And
psychotic.
Then
yes.
There's a moment. Isn't there? There's a moment where a tear falls from her eye.
Yes, I think you're right.
So you realize that she is not in a vegetative state. She knows what's going on.
She might have some awareness.
Yeah.
It's limited.
Yeah.
But I agree with you.
But then he leaves. He leaves her in that dark room overlooking the city, goes downstairs to his girlfriend, who also gave him up.
Yeah.
To Sophia. That's how Sophia managed to find Francis to begin with. Goes down to his girlfriend, the madam of the street prostitutes, and begins to talk to her as if she is his mother. And just like that night that they spent together in that nightclub dancing, he's like, "Come on, Ma, let's dance," whatever. And she's like, "Oh, I'm so are you proud of me?" She is now the person who has to speak for his mother and say all the things to Oz that he has ever wanted to hear from the one person he has loved so dearly. It's twisted, but it's also, and this is why I disagree in the beginning when we were talking about whether he is a sympathetic, whether he's a straight up villain. When she is now having to be that mouthpiece, I still feel bad for Oz. He never got any of this from the one person or people that he wanted. Now, I'm not saying it justifies any of the things that he did.
I think he got it here and there when he provided for his mother. And it was very
Well, yeah.
superficial at times where
Yeah.
here's this jewelry, here's this beautiful dress, let me
Yeah.
take you out. It was still what he was doing
It
as
wasn't
a child.
genuine though.
No,
Like
not
her
on his-
reactions were never genuine.
Neither was genuine. They were both almost in this fantasy world where Oz was looking for her attention, looking for her admiration, trying
but
to
I think
build
his,
himself up.
But I do think his was genuine. I think his was genuine in the only way he knew how to do it, like by giving her jewelry, by giving her. I don't think there was anything not genuine about
Sure.
like, look, Ma, just tell me you're happy. Tell me you're proud of me. Tell me I did something good. You know, like this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy this affection from you. I'm going to show you that I'm able to take care of you. She openly admitted that she always hated him from that moment forward, and that anything she did where she was like, good job, you know, whatever, would have been half-hearted at best, right? So there was a level of, I don't know, there was a level, there was a moment where I looked at him and I was just like, I just feel sad for him, you know, not that it justifies anything that he's done or anything that he's becoming, but I suddenly felt it didn't have to be this way.
For certain. The
Yeah.
tragedy of Oz's story is very I would say is kind of the heart of this series.
Yeah.
That you continue to watch him fall and fail and try to form relationships and stumble through that. This is a person who has vulnerable narcissism. Yes, we see the grandiosity, the not only the sense of importance, but the hunger for importance. I'm not just a driver. I'm going to be better than that. I'm going to be seen as a loyal member of this family. I'm going to impress people. But you also, so you have the need for admiration. And the person who he needs the most admiration from is his mother. And it is time after time, it's so fleeting. One set of jewelry one night isn't going to get him this is why I said it's not genuine. Like the actual meaningful admiration that he is looking for, it is frail. But when I say vulnerable narcissism, the insecurity is what I'm talking about. The low self-esteem, feeling as if he's less than, which he got from when he was a child, right? He constantly felt that he wasn't as competent and as good as his brothers, and the hypersensitivity to criticism. Once you call him out, he might just off you.
Yeah.
This is, I think, where we see some consistency beginning to end, even in that relationship with Vic, as that loyalty, as that familiarity becomes closer to Oz, that actually becomes more threatening to him. That becomes a sense of potential vulnerability for him. Here is yet someone else who could criticize me, who could make me feel less than, and you have that sense of abandonment. And that's the cornerstone. I think that's like the number one thing with vulnerable narcissism. Someone who's, let's say, if you have someone who's a coworker who has this, like before they get fired, they'll quit. Before someone breaks up with them, they will do that. So they'll do the harm before the other person does it to them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I saw what went down with Vic, is Oz feeling very uncomfortable with the possibility that that person may abandon him, or may feel let down by him, or may, pose any of these threats to him. And so he needs to cut that off before he feels any sense of frailty, fragility, discomfort around who he is as a person. He has to stay on top. That is the peak of their relationship, and that's where it ends.
Yeah.
So I don't see a lot of change from beginning to end.
Interesting, because even his name, like he says often he doesn't like the name Penguin. He sees it as derogatory. He feels that they're making fun of him. And then at the end, someone, after he's done all this, someone says, "Hey, aren't you the Penguin?" And he turns to him. He's like, "Yeah." Like he takes it.
He owns it.
He owns it. He turns it around, and he's like, "Yeah, now you're going to remember the name Penguin. And rather than laugh, you're going to basically, your knees are going to knock in fear going forward. So to me, him getting what he's always wanted, but it not fulfilling him the way that he thought it would, is now creating a new character that we have basically been promised to see in the new sequel to the Batman.
I mean, just
released.
like Sophia, I think this is a fantasy playing out. I think this is a fantasy becoming real for him. And so in a way, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I just think it's kind of like who he is continuing to manifest.
Yeah.
And it's becoming louder and bolder, and it's going to become super, aggressive and violent. If they do a season 2, we're really going to see.
Which he says he's open to.
Yeah, I'm open to it too. I would love to see a second season. You don't need it. I mean, this really was enough. It was very contained, very fulfilling. And by the way, my description of his pathology being consistent over time, that is realistic. And that is why not only do I really like this series, I think it is super well written. And I also feel like it's genius in and of itself. Doesn't need a second season, doesn't need a second Batman movie to explain it or anything. It really truly stands out as fantastic work in writing.
Yeah.
And the reality is, and this is where I think in stories, I think to align with you, you need some movement toward where is this all going? Okay, he's becoming the Penguin. I see it now. There is change. From the perspective of realistic psychopathology, who he is who he is from day one. And I think that's also brilliant writing. How do you tell an arc while also not violating real psychological science especially when it comes to forensic psychology? And I think they really nailed that. You and I are probably actually more on the same page than
So you're saying that even when he was sort of weak and bumbling, he's the same person. By the end, he simply just reached his full potential.
Reaching his full potential. Right. But the signs were there, and the signs sort of, came and went. But I'm not seeing a completely different person than the beginning. And I loved the juxtaposition of the flashbacks, the scenes when he was a child and as an adult trying to fulfill this fantasy of him and his mother. And then, as you said, trying to fulfill that fantasy with his girlfriend because his mother's basically bedridden and can't do this anymore. And that will continue to play out in the different relationships that he has. Yeah. How can I get the admiration and the attention and the validation that I've been seeking since I was a little kid?
Like I said, Colin Farrell is brilliant in this performance. He has said that he is willing to give it another shot, to do a second season if that's what's asked of him. He's already signed on to do 3 movies as necessary. So, there is a sequel to the film being made, and presumably he is in it. He has said in interviews that he hasn't read a script yet, so he doesn't know how much, if at all, he's in it. But Matt Reeves has said Penguin's in the movie. I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm interested to see more of Oz than I even am Bruce in a second Batman movie.
Great show. Highly recommend The Penguin. Cannot say anything negative about it. It can be disturbing, which is maybe just a content disclaimer that it's very, very disturbing at times, but I highly recommend it. I think it's a great show.
Yeah. I want to thank members of our Patreon family that have made this possible. Aaron Wenrick, Mike Fickland, Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, Kevin Ortel, Heroes Journey Fitness, Todd Stashwick, Trevor Schwartz, Mark Pepper, Frank Muller, that best friend that I was talking about, Swaras Ali, Lindsay B, Jamiroquai J, and Carl Ward. Thank you all for all of your support. We're very appreciative. Thank you for making this happen. You can get your name called out in the next episode of the podcast by going to Arkham Sessions going to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. Join the $5 tier. That gets your name shouted out. And then also, Drea, why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com, Instagram, Dr. Drea Psychology. I'm on Blue Sky now as Dr. Drea, and then all the other attachments to the Blue Sky social, blah, blah, blah. And of course, come and visit our Discord. You can find the link in the Arkham Sessions Instagram bio page.
That's right. And that Instagram would be at the Arkham Sessions. You can also find me on Instagram. I am at B_Ward028. You can follow our family over at Fanbase Press. Email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook. Do all of that wonderful stuff. And I think that about covers it for our very special, very long episode covering an entire series in one go.
We did it. We did
it.
I want to wish everyone a safe and healthy holiday break for those of you observing the Thanksgiving holiday this weekend. And we will be back to Harley Quinn in the next episode. So stay tuned.
And it's a doozy. Looking forward to it. Till then, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Am I crazy? Is it all in my head? Tell me that I'm too emotional and that I have an overactive imagination and that I shouldn't take things so personally.